So West Asia is on a spending spree, but the world's leading companies are cutting costs. This has been the year of layoffs. Thousands of workers across sectors have lost their jobs, and appraisals have not brought much cheer. So why are so many corporates in distress? Because their fundamentals are weak. Businesses around the world are staring at a massive debt pile. Let's start with the US and Europe. Companies there owe trillions of dollars in debt. I have the numbers. American and European companies owe well over $38 trillion. You heard that right, $38 trillion. For perspective, $38 trillion represents 90% of the combined GDPs of the US and Europe. So the debts are big enough to consume their entire economies. Such levels are not sustainable, and the stress is beginning to show. Corporate defaults are rising. High-profile companies are in distress. Like French supermarket chain Casino, it owes over $7 billion and it is struggling to repay. The company is holding talks with creditors. A French court is overseeing these discussions. In Britain, Thames Water is in crisis. This is the UK's biggest water supplier. It owes more than $18 billion. Last month, there was talk of a government bailout. In Sweden, there are fears of a crash in the property sector. SBB, a leading landlord, could be out of cash. Its debt has been rated as junk. In America, a similar trend is emerging. Wall Street is worried. Bad loans in the US have exceeded $500 billion. Again, these are corporate loans, and the impact is being felt across sectors in real estate, healthcare, retail, telecom, software services. How did so many companies end up here? Well, they made some bad calls. 3 years back, when the pandemic hit, when economies came to a grinding halt, governments and central banks encouraged borrowing. Loans were made available for cheap. So corporates borrowed heavily. But then inflation surged. Central banks began hiking interest rates. They wanted to drain the excess money out of their economy, so the loans became more expensive. And the result is this: interest rates are high and businesses are struggling to sustain themselves. Many have no option but to default. And what's worrying is the scale of this. Again, I have more data. This is from the United States. In the first 6 months of 2023, as many as 55 American companies defaulted, and this is a new record, 55 defaults. In 2022, just 36 companies defaulted in the entire year. Right now, we're just halfway through 2023, and more than 50 companies have already defaulted. What about the rest of the world? Globally, 81 companies defaulted in the first half of this year. Experts are worried about this trend. They fear that more companies will fail in the year ahead. Just 3.8% of the companies defaulted globally, 3.8% in the whole world. According to Moody's, this year the default rate could cross 4%. In the worst case scenario, it could cross even 13%. And this will be worse than the 2008 financial crisis. This is bad news for everyone, because if the job creators fail, the impact will be felt on a country's economy. It could trigger a recession. So what is the solution? A stable macroeconomic environment, less tinkering with interest rates. That's the demand from American banks. In the month of May, the Bank of America made an assessment. It warned about defaults worth $1 trillion if the market remains uncertain and if there is a credit crunch. This is what they said will happen. Big defaults. So should the rest of the world worry about this? It should, because the impact of defaults in the West will be felt in the developing world too. Export-dependent economies like China will face a decline in orders. Countries like India, which rely on export of services like software, may also lose business. Of course, this is a hypothetical situation right now, but the risks are clear and evident. The world has narrowly avoided a large-scale recession this year. If the corporate debt is not controlled, we may find ourselves back to square one and still dealing with a potential recession.